Welcome to the Stories Create Moments podcast, the podcast where we talk about how stories and books can help children connect with themselves, their peers, their communities, and the world. Today we're talking about the importance of creating a love of books and stories in our homes in the early childhood years, as well as using books and stories to help our children connect to themselves, their families, their peers, their communities, and the world through stories and books. I'm excited to introduce you to our guest, Alyssa Wilkinson. Alyssa is a mom of two, a photographer, and a writer. She's going to have her first book published in the spring. She's also been busy working on her new home and has built that beautiful bookcase that we see in the background, which is very on brand for you. I love it. And she's also my friend. Alyssa, can you welcome to the podcast. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your new book coming out?
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to. Well, I mean, you know me really well, so this feels silly to introduce myself to you. But yeah, like you said, I'm a mom, I'm an author, a photographer, and I'm a poet. And we actually just moved across the country to upstate South Carolina. So that's been a really, really fun new adventure for our family. Tons of growth. Let's see what's interesting about me. I would say when I was little, I spent a lot of time on the roof outside my bedroom window, which is probably not something I would let my kids do, but I did a lot of it. And we lived in the middle of nowhere, Colorado. It's a really small town with dirt roads and no stoplights and more cows than people. And we just had like a one little cafe in the town that we could ride our bikes to and get an ice cream during the summer, but there wasn't a whole lot there. So I spent a lot of time in my own mind on my roof. And I would climb out my bedroom window and I would sit on the warm roof in the summer. And our roof or our house overlooked sunflower fields and a pond. And I could just sit up there and escape and be alone. And I would read books, or I would bring out my black and white composition notebook and I would just scribble these really terrible melodramatic stories about like World War II, and they were so dark for a kid to be writing, but I didn't know they were terrible then. I just knew I loved having a scene pop into my head, and then magically, as you write them down, other people get to experience it too. And I thought that was so cool. And I've never really stopped writing since then. I've always written. For a long time, though, I got really shy about writing. I let that fear of rejection get into my head, and I was terrified that I wasn't good enough, and so I let that hold me back. And I was kind of like a closeted writer for a long time. But once my kids were born, I realized I didn't want them to live that way. I didn't want them to have these hopes and dreams and things they wanted to do and be held back by fear. That was so silly. And I wanted them to be able to chase their dreams. And the only way that I could encourage them to do that without being a total hypocrite was for me to do it myself. And so I picked the biggest, scariest dream I had, and I decided to go after it. And that was to become a published author. So it kind of started out a few years ago as an exercise in getting better at taking rejection, which I hate it. I hated it at the beginning. I still hate it now, but I didn't want to let it stop me from chasing what I wanted to do. And it was also an exercise in accepting imperfection, which is really hard for me. So since 2022, when I really started pursuing writing, I've had so much rejection and so much imperfection. But I've also been blessed to be published as a poet 3 times, and I have my debut novel coming out this next May, so May of 2026, and I've really met the most wonderful people in the publishing world, and it's been such a huge blessing for me and my family.
I love what you said about being an example for your kids so that your kids have the courage to chase their dreams. I think that's something that's really important. And when they see us doing hard or scary things out of our comfort zone, they're more inclined to do that too. And there's really taking risks is, I think, a very important part of life. You miss out on things if you don't take risks and you stay in your safe place. So I love that you did that, and that was a part of the reason that motivated you to keep pursuing your writing dream.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I think sometimes kids are great at making you do making you do stuff you wouldn't do otherwise. They push you out of your comfort zone in the best way. And I'm grateful that they were my little catalysts for doing something I've always wanted to do.
When you were talking about writing on your roof, I just kept thinking about Anne of Green Gables. I feel like that's something she would do.
That's like the nicest thing you could have ever said to me. I was obsessed with Anne of Green Gables as a kid.
Do you ever see yourself in book characters that you love?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, I think there are a few that I really identify with. Anne of Green Gables was a big one for me. Like, I never felt like I super fit in as a kid, uh, but I had these big dreams, and I was just a weirdo. It was fine, but it was good. A lovable weirdo, maybe. And I also feel like I've ended up channeling a lot of myself into different characters that I've written, like in my book. And I didn't realize I was doing it at the time, but as I've gone back into revisions, I'm like, oh my gosh, I wrote myself as a kid or a part of myself as a kid. And I think that's a really cool thing about literature and books in general is you get to see versions of yourself. And I think it helps you understand how you work better.
I think you're right. And I bet that's probably true for all authors. And either they put themselves or someone they know into it most of the time. So I love that. I was in preparation for this conversation with you. I read a couple of research articles about using books and stories to connect with your kids, and I found some interesting stuff. I read two research articles. One was a study published in the National Library of Medicine, and another was published in Science Direct. I'll link both articles in the show notes, but they both talked about the advantages that reading and books and that connection with parents and families can have on the kid, the impact it can have. And there were some obvious things like, reading in early childhood with your kids was a predictor of later development of reading skills, including vocabulary and comprehension. And there were certain things that happened in those book interactions that didn't happen with those same people in their other regular everyday interactions. And that was that there was different vocabulary used because books tend to have more complex language than our everyday conversations. And there was more turn taking happening between parents and kids in the conversation. So I feel like they're really learning those skills when they're doing this that they don't get without that, the impact of the books. And then I was really interested to see that interactions that happened in early years impacted their motivation to read up into the fourth grade, and that the academic benefits were still showing up in 10th grade from early reading. And I love the thing I loved the most about this was that children who were read too young were later internally motivated to read themselves. So establishing this culture of reading in our homes, in the study that was happening in, those kids grew up wanting to read and making that a part of their lives without being told to or forced to. And I love this quote. It says, "Pleasant early encounters with literacy." I love that. Pleasant early encounters with literacy led children to develop tendencies to read frequently and broadly in later years. So I'm so excited to talk to you about this. You and I have talked about this before. I know that it's very important to you. I know that books and stories have been an important part of your life since you were young in various ways. And so would you tell us what were some of the foundational things in your life that led to a love of stories and books?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And there are so many. I have countless rolling through my head right now, and I'm going to get off of this podcast with you and have so many more that I'm going to say, oh, I wish I would have shared those. But I don't think you want this episode to be 5 hours long, so I'm going to try and pare it down for you. I think the number one thing off the top of my head is my mom was the best storybook reader ever. I mean, her character voices were legendary. I cannot read Amelia Bedelia to this day without doing her Amelia Bedelia voice. Like, that is who Amelia Bedelia is, and it just sounds wrong if somebody reads it any other way. My mom was not a massive reader for herself, but she was constantly reading us picture books, and she always made them feel so immersive by giving every character their own personality. She had a background in theater. She wanted to go into studio and set design, and she did a lot of theater when she was a kid. And so I think that played into it, really. She was really, really good at that. And we were homeschooled for a few years, and we were constantly reading books out loud together. And we were challenged to make it exciting and make it interesting. And she brought those stories to life for me. She could transport me to another time or another place with how she portrayed them. And that made reading so exciting. All of a sudden, it wasn't sitting down with a monotone voice and we were strapped to a chair and forced to listen. We wanted to be there because she worked so hard to make it a really immersive, fun experience for us. So that was probably the earliest thing that I can remember, is just being surrounded with books all the time because my mom would read them to us and she made it fun. Second thing, and this for me as an emerging, probably like a middle grade reader, this really solidified my love of reading, is my dad. His mom was someone who just was just a constant reader. She had books everywhere in her house. This is my paternal grandma. And so he loves to read. He really didn't have a choice but to become a reader because of her. My dad was the first person to introduce me to Harry Potter. And he came home one day and he had this book and he goes, "You have to read this. It's so good." And I was like, okay. He bought it. He devoured the book in one day. He gave it to me. And then I did the same thing. Like one day later, I was like, "Dad, that book was so good." And that became our tradition. Every time a new Harry Potter book would come out, he would go buy it. He would take a day, maybe two, if it was like the longer, later ones, and he'd read the whole thing. And then he'd give it to me. And I would do the same thing. I would just lock myself in my room and just read, read, read until I was done. And my mom honestly kind of hated that because for a whole week she would lose both of us, right? Because we're just locked in our rooms reading, and she had to like good naturedly ground me from Harry Potter so I would come eat and do my chores. But that was so special to me to share that with my dad, to have a book that we could connect over, or a whole series that we could connect over. And it kind of became our thing. And that was so, so important. And I think you've said it before, that stories create moments. And my dad, he traveled a lot when I was growing up, but that series, Harry Potter, created moments for us to connect and bond, even though he wasn't always to be able to be there in our home because he had to travel. When he was around, we were really present because we had something to connect over, and that was the best.
You talked about your mom being a storybook reader to you and your siblings when you were little, and I know that you said she wasn't a big reader herself, but I love that she brought her theater background into the time she spent with you and your siblings reading, and that she could do voices, and that was something. And I think you mentioned once that she recorded some stories for your kids. So even though she's passed on now, they have the experience of having that time with her too, even though she's not around, which is amazing.
Yeah, it's really, really special. I mentioned Amelia Bedelia, and that's one of the books that she recorded on these little, it's like little audio characters. They're called Tonys. And I can hear my kids put the character on, and I'll hear my mom's Amelia Bedelia voice pop up. And that's just really, it means a lot because that's how I grew up, was listening to her tell stories. And now my kids get to do that too, even though she passed away last year.
Yeah, that's really special. And I love that thread that connects 3 generations, which there's something really powerful about that. And you also mentioned your dad, and that even though he would travel a lot, he used books to connect with you. That was something that bonded you together and you could get excited about. And since it was a series, it was something that could go on for a long time. And I love that your dad chose to connect with you that way as he traveled and wanted to have that connection with you.
Yeah, it was really cool. I think he brought the first Harry Potter book actually back from the UK. And so I think that's where he got exposed to it, is when on a business trip, and he brought it back and was like, you have to read this. And he still does that today. If he finds a really good book, he'll pass it on to me and say, Alyssa, you've got to read this. And I love that he still does that.
I love that he does that too. I was just thinking today because Andrew recommended a book to me. Actually, he's been pushing for me to read it since our summer trip, and I finally listened to it the last 2 days. And it was so good. But while I was listening, I thought, I can see why he likes this book. And I think when someone recommends a book to you, you can learn about them, you can learn about their heart, what's important to them. And so I love that you're, even as an adult, your dad is recommending books to you and wants to share that with you.
Absolutely. First of all, I love that Andrew recommended you a book. That is so adorable. But I think you're right that when you see what resonates with somebody in literature, you come to understand them in a different way because they're telling you something about themselves without outright telling you. You get to see what's important to them. And that's a really cool, deeper understanding.
100%. I love that. Were there other things in your childhood or as you were growing up that were important to you, that set a foundation for this love of stories and books?
Oh, absolutely. I would say every Christmas there were two things that I couldn't just count on being under the tree, and I was always so excited. Number one, I would get some sort of Lego set. It was usually Harry Potter, but number two, there would be a big giant box with each of our names on them, and I would open it up, and my mom throughout the year collected books that she thought we would enjoy, whether it was at like the book fair or through the catalogs or at a store or whatever. If she saw a book throughout the year that reminded her of one of us, she would set it aside for us. And then she would wrap them all up in a big box and put them under the tree. And we would just have dozens of new books. And I would sit by the fireplace all of Christmas break just reading. And it was so special for her to have picked out something that really reminded her of us, kind of like we were just talking about with if somebody shares a book with you, you get to know them better. It was really special for me to see what she thought I would enjoy. And that really curated my love of reading, just to have something every Christmas. It created this really pleasant, nostalgic feeling around reading for me because it was my childhood. And it was Christmas as a kid, which is even more impactful, I think.
For sure. And how cozy to be able to have these new books reading by the fire. But I love that your mom thought of you, all her kids, and thought, what would they like? What would they enjoy? And chose books specifically for that. That says a lot about how intentional she was as a parent, too.
Yeah, as a mom now, I really understand and appreciate how intentional she had to be because this was not a last minute, just throw something in a box kind of gift. This was something that she worked on all year long to curate these packages for us. And every single set of books was wildly different. And so it made me feel special and made me feel seen as a kid that my mom knew what I liked and she knew what I was interested in. And it wasn't the same as my other sisters and my brother. And she really knew us each so well, and that reflected in the books that she picked for us. And I felt important to her because she took time to see what mattered to me and to encourage that.
Oh, I love that. I love that you said I felt important to her. Do you still have some of the books that she gave you growing up?
I have so many books that she gave me growing up. I say these bottom two like shelves on either side, a lot of them are books that I had growing up, and there's still a ton more left at my parents' house that I really want to go back and get actually now that I'm thinking about it.
I was wondering because those books on those shelves look a little bit older and more worn, and they look like the kind of books that have been very loved.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well,
very
anything else you
loved
want
to
to
the
share?
point of maybe
Sorry.
too loved.
Sorry. I don't think a
No,
book can
fine.
be too
You're
loved.
good. You just keep taping that spine back together, right? It's like the
Yeah.
Velveteen Rabbit. The more it's loved, the more
Yeah.
real it is.
Yeah, definitely. David's always worried about the spine on books, which it's a good thing to worry about. But I'm like, a book is supposed to be, handled and like loved and felt and used. So anyway, we've had conversations about that.
I'd say the final thing that I can remember is I had an incredible fifth grade teacher, and she would host these reading groups within the class setting. And she had split the class into smaller clusters of students. And then we would each group of kids would read different books that she'd kind of picked specifically for the kids that were in that group. And we would come to her table with her every week and have like a book club, like a discussion about the book. And I think that was the first time that I really started to grasp symbolism and the importance of so many different literary tools was through those discussions with her. And I started to appreciate story, not just reading a story, but the art of story. And she just had a way of bringing out the deeper heart of any book that we were reading. And that had such an impact on me as a reader and now as a writer. She was super supportive of our love for reading and for books. And I do remember one time she told me, when you ever write a book, when you publish a book, I'll be the first in line to buy it. And that, oh my gosh, as a fifth grader, to have some adult tell me they thought I was going to write a book and they wanted to read it, that meant the world to me. And that's something that I've hung on to now for 2 decades. And I would love to find her and tell her thank you and send her a copy of my book next year. I'll have to see if I can find her.
Oh, I hope you can find her. I'm sure she would love that. I'm sure she doesn't even know what an impact she had on you. So that would be really amazing for her to hear. Do you think that you talked about how when she was teaching, you really started to grasp story and the elements of story and telling stories and writing stories? Did you see a change or maybe more of a depth come into your writing at that time?
Absolutely. I think that's one of the wonderful things about reading too, right? Is it makes you a better writer naturally. And the more you're surrounded by people who are elevated readers, you become an elevated reader, which elevates your writing. And that absolutely has seeped into my writing. I feel like up until that point, my writing was very much chronological, right? Because I was a kid, I was writing what happened. Here's my character, here's their problem, this is what happened. And then through that class, I started to appreciate, okay, what can I say without putting on the page? And how can I make people feel without telling them how to feel? And that made a world of difference in my writing.
That's amazing. I love how you use the word elevated, become an elevated reader and an elevated writer. And I just think there's a lot of imagery in that word that has value for this conversation.
Oh, absolutely, because there's a difference between surviving and thriving, right? And it's kind of the same way as a reader. You can get through a book and walk away and not have really changed, right? But if you are in that thriving mode as a reader or an elevated reader, you walk away from every story a little bit different than the person you were when you started it, because you're really absorbing that meaning. And it's important to help kids get to that point because it makes a big difference in your life.
Yes. I love how you said you walk away as a different person when you've really connected with a story. So as with that mindset and with that passion and that real solid foundation for a love of books and stories, how have you then transferred that to your kids and to the way you set your home up as a parent?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the biggest thing I can think of is we've been reading books together since my babies were literally newborns. Story time's always just been kind of a sacred time to me. It really is. And there's something about sitting down together with a book that forces you to connect and be present. And that's such a gift. We live in a super fast-paced world, right? And it's always about going somewhere, doing something. And you can't, you can try to speed through a book, but the reality is that you can only read so fast. And so sitting down and reading together, it forces you to be present. And I think that undivided attention is enough to plant the seed of a love of books and kids. I mean, you always say that stories create moments, Amber, and I think it's so true. When you sit down to read with your kids, those moments might be small. It's just a few minutes out of our day, but to them, it means the world. And for my kids, they look forward to story time because they know that's a time when they get all of mom. Like I'm not doing anything else in that moment other than sitting with them and reading a book and talking about that story. And that is invaluable to them and to me too.
It's really true. I remember when I don't remember, but I know I have pictures and my dad talked about it a lot. And I was little. I was born early. I was born at least a month early, and I was walking early. I was walking at 8 months. And so my dad talked loved to talk about how he would get home from work and I would reach up and grab his pinky. I was so tiny, and then I'd drag him or pull him to a place on the carpet and sit down on his lap and hand him a book and read to him, and then, or he would read to me. And then as we got older, he would sit in between our rooms and tell us stories, sing us songs. He would tell us made up fairy tale stories, and he would make up stories about the house he grew up in and tell us real stories. And it really did create this connection with him. And I think it also did set the foundation for me of growing up to love books, because I felt loved when he was reading to me. Just like you are saying, you feel your kids feel, and our kids feel when we read to them. They feel this love and this connection and this undivided attention, because we are forced to slow down.
Your dad sounds amazing. I love that so much. I think you're totally right. I mean, that time with your kids and being forced to slow down. There's some quote, and I'm going to butcher it, but it says, doing things with your kids slows down the task, but maybe that's the whole point. And our kids just want us to be present with them. And that's so hard to do. But a book is a wonderful tool to help you slow down and to really, really connect. Or a story, right? Just a made up story. My dad was the master of roundtable stories growing up, where he would start and he'd end in the middle of a sentence, and the next person would have to pick up and go on and add to the story, and then they end in the middle of a sentence. And we would do that all the time, and it was so much fun. And now I do it with my kids, and it forces us to really listen to each other, because if you don't know what somebody else was saying, how do you know how to continue the story? And they love it. They love just that one-on-one, or just FaceTime, that time they get together with us, just talking and laughing and creating these really ridiculous stories or sharing stories from childhood. They just like that time.
Yeah, and it probably helps them really connect with each other too. Like you're saying, they have to really listen to each other and they have to think about what they're going to say, but it's fun and it's time together, and it probably really helps them. It's one of the ways that can help them form good bonds with each other.
Oh, for sure. And it's so funny to hear them like laugh at each other too. And I think they come to appreciate each other's sense of humor and they feed off of each other. And it's just hilarious. Now that my kids are getting a little bit older, I have a 7-year old and a 4-year old, a barely 4-year old. And we read a lot of picture books, but we also make sure we have a chapter book going every night. We just try to sit down and read a chapter. And it's interesting. At first, I remember I started this chapter book thing probably when my oldest, was like 10 months old. And I would sit in his room in his rocking chair, and I started reading Wind in the Willows was the first book we read. And I remember thinking like, wow, this is kind of pointless. He's not listening at all. He was just crawling around the room, destroying everything. But I needed that time, right? Because as a first time mom, I was home all alone, and all I ever heard was my own baby talk. And I needed a good story. And so I just started reading it out loud, and I learned that it didn't really matter if it looked like he was listening. Even at that young age, he was absorbing things, and he would end up crawling over and grabbing the book for me when I was done and handing it back. And now that we have a second child, I mean, she just turned 4 last week. She, she has this really, really, really strong ability to appreciate good story at a super young age. Because I'm reading books now that my 7-year-old will like because he's an advanced reader. He's more advanced than the 4-year-old is, obviously, but she loves a good story. They don't go over her head. And she cherishes like this collection of Kate DiCamillo books that she has. And she can tell me what each story is. She'll tell me what Because of Winn-Dixie is about. She'll tell me about Tale of Despereaux, all these different books. And it just really, it makes such a difference. They don't always look like they're listening. Like they could be playing around me, building blocks or whatever. But then they sit down and they'll tell you. And I don't know, something, they just soak it up. I don't know if that made any sense. I was kind of rambling, but
No, it made complete sense. And I think it goes back to what I shared at the beginning from those two studies. She's going to be so well prepared for school and for understanding reading, having these reading skills really strong because of the exposure she's had to that. And what you were saying about how you would just sit and read to him when he was 10 months old and he didn't understand, but I think hearing language is really powerful for small children. When Andrew was a baby, he had colic and he screamed for the first 15 weeks a lot, and we would go for a lot of walks and I would just talk to him the whole time and he didn't understand what I was saying, but I think hearing language has set him up for success and academically throughout his life. So there's a lot of power in just hearing language at that age.
absolutely. Well, and I think you're totally right that it may not seem like they understand, but by respecting them and honoring them and their abilities enough, they grow into that ability, right? If you don't read books that write down to kids, or if you don't speak down to your kids, they become capable just by that experience, right? They grow into that space and you're giving them the ability to do that by reading them really good literature or speaking to them. And obviously you have to understand like each child's capacity and their developmental progress. But I think you do them an honor and a service by treating them with respect and knowing they can understand what a good story is. They understand what good literature is and what a good conversation is. And they grow more and more the more that you offer that to them.
Yes, they definitely do. And that was one of the questions was how has this focus on reading and books and stories and good literature benefited your kids and helped them grow? We've kind of already talked a little bit about that. Do you have anything to add to that conversation?
Yeah, for sure. The first thing, I mean, this is pretty obvious and basic, but their vocabularies are pretty hefty. I mean, really impressive for their ages. And that's not because I'm reading them the dictionary or anything, because we're not, but kids are so savvy and so capable, and they just pick it up from good literature that doesn't write down to them. Like, I feel like I keep saying that, but really, kids are capable of understanding so much. And I think as an author, I'm very passionate about encouraging other authors to respect kids. They are extremely capable. And when you give them good literature, they recognize it. And if you surround them with it and with an elevated vocabulary, they're like little sponges and they'll just soak it up. It gives them better communication skills to express what's going on at their hearts and at their minds. And also, there's like nothing cuter than a tiny person using big words or expressing themselves in kind of an adult way. It's so cute. I love it. But that's the first part that I noticed is vocabulary for sure is just dramatically improved from what I would have expected.
I've seen that too in kids that read a lot when they're little or get read to a lot. I feel like stories create such a soft, nurturing, fun place to learn about vocabulary and about whatever topic the book is about. And especially when they're little, they like books to be read over and over and over again. And a lot of, picture books for younger kids have repetitive language and rhyming words that's very pleasing to hear, and it makes it fun for them to learn through that. And then as they read older books, or we read to them more advanced books, they pick it up too. So
Oh, absolutely. And it impacts their vocabulary, but also their comprehension. I think the more you read to your kids, they start to develop this natural ability to absorb and analyze, process, and understand, right? So if you are reading a book to your kids and you take time to pause and you say, okay, what's happening here? Or if you're just picking up from the night before, if you're reading a chapter book and you say, okay, what happened last night? Let's remember what happened with our character. They naturally develop that comprehension. And it really, that serves kids in so many ways. The ability to read something, absorb it, and then call up that information and analyze it is a crucial life skill that they can learn in a lot of ways, but it's way easier to learn it through reading, and it comes more naturally, I think. And it serves them in every aspect of their lives.
And it's really fun.
It is, it's way, oh my gosh. It's by far the most fun way to learn comprehension.
Yes, definitely. Are there other ways you've seen them grow that you would like to share about?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that we do is we make a point to be in the library at least once a week, and we check out this just obscene number of books. Like that bag almost dislocates my shoulder every time we're walking out of the library. But it's good for me, right? I need to work out. But the kids love it. And I try not to place any restrictions on what level books they can check out within reason, right? Like I look at the content of something and make sure that it's appropriate for them. But as long as they're within the children's section, if my toddler wants to check out a 300-page encyclopedia along with her picture books, like, great. I don't tell her no. I think that treasure hunt of finding whatever interests you in the library is what makes it so magical. But it also develops their confidence, because realistically, I know that a lot of those books probably won't end up being read within the week because they might be a little bit over their heads, but I'm not going to tell them that, and they don't need to know that. That's not why we go. We go to help them love books. And what's happened with that is, honestly, by allowing them to check out the books that they want, it's given them a lot of confidence in their abilities as readers, because I'm not telling them, oh, I don't think that's, you're not ready for that. I don't know if you can handle that yet. And so they've never processed like, oh no, this book might be too much for me. They just check it out if it's interesting to them. If they read it, great. If they don't, whatever. But it develops their confidence a lot as a reader, but also just in their capacity in general, because they're not questioning whether or not they can do something. They're just trying it. And if they're ready for it, great. And if they're not, they'll grow into it and they can check it out next week or the week after that.
That's really fun. I know when I go to a library, I love getting the books and holding them, and I just think there's something about connecting with the books, and then the confidence that you're talking about them building through that process too, and not holding them back from checking out whatever book they want within reason. So I think that's really fun.
And it's fun to see what they check out too. My little girl's really into Wonder Woman right now, and she lugged over this giant encyclopedia of superheroes the other day. It was so heavy. And she wanted it, and she actually sat down and looked at it for 2 hours when we got home.
Wow.
And I was shocked. But she did it, and she loved it.
That is so fun. I love leaning into what they're interested in and exposing them to more of those books and topics, because I think that really helps them learn too. So that's really fun that she did that for 2 hours. That's amazing. I know as you have done different things with your kids and you've encouraged this love of learning with them, you've also focused on imagination. What do you think is the value of nurturing imagination in our children? And what can we do to foster imagination in them?
That's such an important question to ask. And it's one of those things, I think imagination is a characteristic that is easy to gloss over as a parent, because there are so many other skills. I mean, all day, every day, you're trying to think about how can I help my kid? What do they need to learn? What do they need to grow? And imagination is not one that immediately pops to people's minds, but there are so many benefits to nurturing your kids' imagination and creativity. And the biggest one that I can think of is developing empathy. If your kid can read a story or listen to a story and put themselves in a character's shoes and really take a moment to imagine how might this person or character be feeling in an abstract situation that they've never experienced themselves, it gives them the ability to do that in real life. They learn to work with people and see people that are very different from them, that have a different lived experience, and to understand in at least a small degree what that person might be going through and how they might be feeling in a situation, even if it's not something they've ever had. And that's invaluable to learn at a young age.
It definitely is. Have you seen real time examples with your kids where you feel like they have shown empathy to someone and you think, oh, this has a direct relationship to the imagination that the things we've imagined and the things we've done?
Yeah, I don't know if this is taboo to talk about on a book podcast, but we were watching a movie. We were watching The Grinch, the Jim Carrey one. And my son was 3. He was really, really young. And it was the part where the Grinch goes off the handle at the jubilation and he's like just causing mayhem. And I was worried my son was going to be afraid of him. And I could see the emotion building in him. Like he was starting to get tears in his eyes and he was snuggled in close to me. And I thought, oh, shoot, he's going to be afraid of the Grinch now. And so I paused it. I said, hey, buddy, are you okay? Is this too scary? And he looked at me and a little tear rolls down his cheek. It was the sweetest thing. And he goes, Mom, the Grinch is broken. And that was so special for me to see, oh my gosh, he's not seeing this bad behavior and thinking the Grinch is bad. He was seeing that it was a result of something deeper that the Grinch was going through and feeling. And to have that empathy at 3 years old and that understanding, I absolutely accredit to reading, because by that point he was an old pro at listening to chapter books, and I think it helps them so much. It really does.
Oh, I love that. Mom, he's broken. That's so sweet. And the fact that he used the word broken to describe the Grinch is really interesting.
Yeah, I was like, oh my gosh, you are the purest soul. A strong imagination allows kids to see that in other people, right? With, like, for example, with the Grinch, but it also helps them process their own hard emotions too, and their own hard circumstances through another character's story. If my kids are struggling with something, I will often try to find a book that discusses that theme. And I found that if we talk about it and imagine what the character is going through and how they might be feeling, it leads to really helpful discussions that benefit my own kids without the pressure of feeling like their issues are under a microscope, right? And so much of developing imagination in our kids comes down to communication, really. And so as you're having these moments, you're building their imagination, but you're also building your communication skills with them. If you walk around with your kids and say, ooh, what if you were fighting a dragon? Like, how would you feel about that? Or we were reading a book last night about a frog that thinks it's a unicorn and wants to be a unicorn, and everybody tells it you're not a unicorn, and it kind of makes it feel bad. And my 4-year-old and I were talking about, oh, how would you feel if you really had a big dream and somebody told you you couldn't do it? It helps them process hard emotions. And it does it in a way that doesn't feel threatening, and they don't feel like they're being critiqued or nitpicked. It's just a safe space for them to think about something that they're going through without even processing that it's about them. Does that make sense?
Yes, 100%. And actually, Kiri was talking about that in the interview that I did with her a couple of weeks ago, Kiri Jorgensen. She was sharing that to help kids connect to the books they're reading, have them talk about the character and how they're feeling at the beginning. How are they feeling in the middle? What do you notice about what the character is doing or feeling? And then how do they feel at the end? So you can also see the growth of the character and how they went through the hard things and came out on the other side. And I thought that was really a wonderful way to approach reading with kids, which is what you're talking about, and talking them through what do you think the character feels and how are they handling this and how would you handle it? How would you feel?
Absolutely. And really, really young kids are capable of doing that too. This is not a skill that you can start, at fifth grade or older. This is something that your 2-year old or your 1-year old is capable of looking at a picture book and you can pause and say, oh, look at their face. How do you think they feel? And they can let you know. And that's something you can develop at a very young age, is that ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes. And they're very, very wise. Your kids will be able to pick up on that.
And I think it's like any skill, the earlier you can start learning it at an age appropriate level, the better off you'll be because you'll just build on that skill as you get older.
Yeah, it's a very natural progression for sure.
I have one more question for you with imagination. When kids are little, you do different things. You can act out different things. You can put props out, or you can just, they're naturally going to turn the living room into a cave or turn their bedroom into a castle. But as they get older, that starts to look different. And maybe this is part of what you were talking about with just talking about the characters or putting yourself into the book. But how does imagination look different and change or adjust as they get older?
That's a great question. And it's honestly one that I maybe don't feel totally equipped to answer because my kids are still pretty little. But I can tell you what I've noticed as they've gotten older is more and more, my kids are the ones taking the lead now on these imagination building exercises. Every night at dinner, we sit together as a family at the table, and it used to be that my husband and I would pose a question, right? Like, ooh, if you had a dragon, what color would it be? And what power would it have? Or something like that. But now, my kids are the ones taking the lead on that. And my son will ask us these wildly creative questions like, if you had a school in the sky, how would you get your students to that school? And these really, really creative things. And they start to take the lead. And they teach me about imagination and how to use my own creativity. And they ask me questions. And that's such a beautiful full circle moment. And I think it also lets them build a lot of confidence too in their creativity. If they see that they've asked a question or they've brought up a topic and an adult lights up and thinks it's interesting, they get like this little extra pep in their step. And it's created so many fun moments for our families to see our kids being the ones now taking the lead on creativity. And it's not mom and dad spoon feeding them opportunities to be creative anymore. It's them creating the scenarios. Even my 4-year-old will come in and be like, okay, mom, I'm the mom and you're the kid and da 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 da. And she'll just go off on the scenario of what's going on. And now they're taking the lead. And I think when you take that leadership position or that teacher role, you learn so much more there. So I think give your kids opportunities to be the creative one and follow suit. Just play along as they get older, and they will love it, and they learn so much more by doing that too.
They do. You're right. You learn when you teach or when you take the lead in something. The fact that your kids are asking these questions at dinner shows that this is something you've done a lot at dinner, which I think is a fun takeaway for people as a fun activity to do. Ask these imaginative questions at dinner, and it promotes good conversation too.
Oh yeah, it is so much fun because then we end up bantering back and forth like, what? That's like not a great way to get students to a school in the sky. They could fall out, or whatever. And it becomes this whole family discussion that we might not have had otherwise. Maybe we would have just been like shoveling food into our mouths quietly as fast as we could. But now we're talking about, should you have a flying school bus? Should you have a giant pelican that scoops everybody into their mouths and flies up to the school? And it's absurd, but it's so much fun and everybody's bonding over it.
I see, and that's the thing, is creating these moments where your families can bond, where you're going back to the purpose of the podcast, connecting them to themselves, their families, their peers, the community, and the larger world. And it seems like imagination and nurturing that does exactly that. So thank you for sharing all of that. Wrapping up, there's a couple of last questions that I have for you. We've talked a lot about this already, but what is the value of setting a foundation for a love of books and stories in our children's lives?
I don't feel like I have sufficient words, ironically, to explain the value of good literature and stories for kids, but it's essential. I will say this, stories shape us. The stories that we grow up listening to about ourselves and others and the world around us play a critical role in how we see all of those things. Those stories seep into the cracks of our souls and they transform us from the inside out. There isn't a single book that doesn't make an impact, or, just story that you've been told that doesn't make an impact on you in some way or another, whether you realize it or not. So bring your kids up on good literature. Give them the respect to give them books that don't talk down to them, and honor their capacity to understand and to grow and to imagine. And you'll never regret it. It really is worth all the sacrifices and time that it takes, because it's not just about stories. It's about how your children are transformed because of those stories and how they will respond to the world around them.
Everything you just said is so beautiful, and I can see the poet in you coming out here, but I love everything you said, but I love this it seeps into the cracks of our soul. This is so powerful.
Yeah, there's a quote that I love, and I'm terrible with my memory, so do not quote this like word for word. Don't hold me to this. But there's a quote that talks about how children need books that teach them that dragons can be conquered, right? Because they're going to come up against their own dragons in life, and they're probably not going to have wings and spit fire, but they will go through really hard things. And every book that you've read teaches you and transforms you and changes you. And if you've read a book and you've watched someone slay their own dragon, it's easier to imagine that you can do that too. And that's invaluable.
That is so true. And that is a power that you find in literature. What encouragement would you give to parents who are in the early childhood years about nurturing a love of books and stories?
That's so hard, right? Because like we've mentioned, sometimes it looks like whatever you're doing is a drop in the ocean and it's not making a difference. But don't worry about if it seems like your kids are listening or not. It's not necessarily about that. It's about setting the precedent and taking the time to make that habit. It's about them growing up and innately knowing, in our home, we read. And if you have a kid that struggles to engage in stories to begin with, try to make it fun. It doesn't need to be this sit on the couch and be quiet and listen. Do short sections at a time, add different voices for the characters, or pick a book that has a movie to go with it and have a special family movie night at the end with like themed snacks to celebrate reading that book. One great piece of advice I will say is if you go on a road trip, pick a chapter book and try to read that whole chapter book on the road trip. That's how we've read so many Roald Dahl books. We were on a cross-country trip and we read Fantastic Mr. Fox and Willy Wonka and all these different things. And it's so much fun. You give them snacks and then you read. And it passes the time so quickly. So just be patient, really. I mean, you have to be a little bit creative as a parent anyways with all the things you come up against. But be patient with yourself. Be patient with your kids. It takes time to nurture the patience for and appreciation of books. And that's hard in a world that's all about instant gratification. But teaching your kids the fine art of slowing down and soaking in good story at a young age will make such a difference in their lives.
Thank you for sharing that, Alyssa. I feel like Roald Dahl would be a great road trip author too. So I love that you do that. I think you have a great memory of your dad also using music to connect stories. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, something my dad would do when we were in the cars, he would turn on, and back then it was like the classical radio station, but now you can just turn it on your phone. But he would turn on classical radio and we would listen to the classical music and we would play this game where we would talk about what the song sounded like to us. And it was so much fun. And I love doing it now with my kids and hearing the different ways that their little brains work. That was such a cool way to be able to exercise our own imagination, but also understand a little bit how other people in our family saw the world. And it was amazing.
That's really fun. And music is also all about telling a story just in a different way. And so connecting those two is a really powerful tool to teach story and to expand their understanding of the world and of stories and of people. So I love that idea.
Absolutely. If you need a good one to start with, go listen to Camille Saint-Saëns, and he has a whole collection of music called The Carnival of the Animals, and little kids love it because the songs actually sound like the animals, and it's a good place to start.
Oh, that sounds fun. I'm going to look that up. I haven't heard of him, but that sounds really fun.
One last thing I was just thinking of too is take time to rediscover what you love to read as a parent and make time for yourself to enjoy books because your kids are going to emulate what they see you doing. And so give them some toys or give them their own books and then just sit on the couch near them and read what you like. Seeing you read is something that they're going to pay attention to and they'll want to do it too because your kids love you and they look up to you and they're going to want to copy you.
That's true. I actually have a memory of being in the car with my mom. She loved to read. We would stop at stoplights and she'd pull her book out and she would say, "Tell me when the light changes," which I don't think is very recommended because it's not safe, but I have that memory and I think it's really funny. Just she didn't want to put her book down, so she was reading whenever she could. Really funny. But, that was an example I had of loving stories and books, like you said. So
Oh my gosh, I love that. I love your mom and I don't even know her.
that's funny. I'll have to tell her I shared that on the podcast. Well, Alyssa, thank you for coming on the podcast. It's always a treat to talk to you. And I love you have such a passion for stories and books, and you have a way of expressing these thoughts and this passion in such a powerful way. So thank you for coming on. Thank you for sharing everything with us. I know you have a book coming out. Can you tell us where people can find you on social media and a website, and when can we expect your book, and what do you want to tell us about that?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, Amber. I just love talking to you and I always leave feeling uplifted every time I talk to you and more motivated to go read and be with my kids. So thank you. That's an important work that you're doing. As far as where people can find me, I mean, if we want to be literal, I'm usually hermited away in this room writing. But beyond that, online, people can find me on Facebook under Alyssa Wilkinson Author or Instagram, which is at or A Wilkinson Books. They can also email me at awilkinsonbooks@gmail, and I love hearing from my fellow bookworms, so that would be great. My book, Unlucky Charm Summer, will be released in May of 2026, and it will be available directly from my publisher, which is Chicken Scratch Books, or it will also be sold anywhere that books are sold. One really cool resource that I will plug about Chicken Scratch is they're not only going to have just the book, but they also are creating multiple study courses to go along with the book for people to study language with their kids, or they will also have a value course. as well that parents can utilize to dive into the core value of the story, which is about self-love and self-worth with their kids. So I'm really grateful to be working with a publisher who places a really high emphasis on academic as well as emotional education. Unlucky Charm Summer is a middle grade historical fiction novel. It's set in 1968 and it follows 11-and-a-half-year-old Duke Foster. She's been passed from one crummy foster family to another, and since the day she was dumped on the steps of Merciful Heart Children's Home in Brooklyn, she's had pretty much nothing but bad luck. I mean, she is just a pest, a nuisance, and the reason her caseworker carries a jumbo-sized bottle of headache medicine in his briefcase. She really thinks she's unlovable. But in a strange twist of fate, her tenement building catches on fire and it sets in motion a series of events that lead her to discover that not only does she have parents, the wonderful kind that love her and did not dump her on a doorstep, but she also has a sister who is her twin and who was adopted to a family in low country coastal Georgia. And so as they meet up and their paths cross, Duke and Daisy embark on a mystery of their own to find their biological parents, a journey which includes a circus bursting with dark secrets and hurricanes and cats with super fluffy ears. And it's a lot of fun. It's a really fun story. It feels a little magical, but it's not a fantasy. And they come to find out that somebody else is trying to bury the mystery of their family as quickly as they're finding clues. So hopefully people enjoy it. I do, but I'm a little biased.
Well, it's such a fun story, and I love the character arc and the relationship arc that both girls go through in the story, and especially Duke, realizing that she is, she does have value and she should be loved. So it's a really, really neat story. It's fun. And so I'm looking forward to everybody reading it. Well, I'm really looking forward to your book coming out. I know I got to be a beta reader for it and I loved it. I know it'll change some, but I'm really looking forward to May so I can buy it and reread it. So I hope everyone gets a chance to read it. It's a great story.
Oh, thanks. That means the world, especially because you know what a good story is. You read more than anybody else I've ever met. So that means a lot.
That's a nice compliment. I do love reading, especially middle grade books. So, well, Alyssa, thank you for coming on the podcast. It's always a treat to talk to you, and we'll look for your book in May.
Thanks, Amber. This has been such a fun experience, and I can't wait to hear the rest of your podcast episodes. It sounds like you've got some really amazing guests coming on.